There's a lot happening right now in the reality TV space, but what people are reacting to in this particular situation is not just drama for entertainment or petty gossip for clicks. It's something much bigger. It's accountability. And that word, accountability, has become the thing that reality television has been running from for years. The audience isn't reacting to a single moment or a single argument. They are reacting to a pattern that has been slowly forming in the background, season after season, episode after episode, until finally it became too obvious to ignore. Once certain footage disappeared, certain questions stopped being answered, and certain explanations no longer lined up with the reality viewers could see with their own eyes, everything shifted. Because when pieces of a story get removed instead of addressed, attention automatically moves to the gaps. Viewers stop focusing on what made it to air and instead start wondering what didn't. And that is where the real story begins. One of the easiest mistakes to make as a viewer is to assume that backlash comes out of nowhere. It doesn't. The audience rarely explodes over a single scene. What actually happens is accumulation, layers, repetition. A storyline gets introduced with confidence, it gets packaged in glossy editing, and it gets delivered with charisma, until over time the delivery stops matching the results. In this case, the central storyline was real estate, high-end real estate, million-dollar properties, luxury finishes, big design elements, imported materials, and the constant promise that these builds represented vision, ambition, and long-term strategy. And on the surface, it genuinely looked impressive. The homes looked expensive, the aesthetics were high-end, and the confidence behind every pitch was strong enough to make viewers believe the investment would pay off. But real estate is not built on vibes. It's built on numbers, timelines, markets, and demand. And slowly, cracks started to show. Homes meant to sell didn't sell. Properties intended to rent didn't rent. Timelines extended and explanations shifted without the results to justify them. That is when viewers started asking very normal business questions, and those questions changed the tone of everything. The fascinating part is that the questions being asked were not shady, they weren't disrespectful, they weren't even confrontational. They were basic, logical business questions that anyone with even a beginner understanding of real estate would ask. Questions like, why did the investment property fail to move? Why did a home intended for profit turn into a personal residence? Why did the rental plan quietly disappear? The moment those questions surfaced, the storyline hit a wall. Because accountability requires answers, and answers require transparency. But instead of transparency, viewers got something very different: avoidance. A key conversation which would have directly addressed those questions never made it to air. It was filmed, it was discussed, it existed, and then it vanished. And when footage disappears, audiences don't assume innocence, they assume strategy. That deleted exchange accelerated the backlash more than anything else, because it didn't just hide a moment, it hid clarity. According to extended footage and accounts circulating online, the decision to live in the property was not the bold strategic move it was presented as. It was not about leveraging or creative positioning. It was the last option available after the market didn't respond. And that reframes everything. If a business move fails, it fails. That's part of entrepreneurship. But reframing failure as strategic brilliance doesn't change the outcome, it only distorts the truth. And audiences today are far less willing to accept distorted truth than they were 10 years ago. Once it became clear that the home didn't sell, didn't rent, and didn't generate income, questions became unavoidable. Removing the footage didn't make those facts disappear, it just confirmed that the answer made someone uncomfortable, and discomfort always makes viewers more curious. The bigger issue here isn't the house itself or the failure of one property, it's the pattern of presentation versus results. Huntsville is not a market where million-dollar homes fly off the shelf. That's not new, that's not controversial, it's just market reality. Yet the same formula keeps getting repeated: big builds, big prices, big confidence. And when the market repeatedly gives the same answer, no sale, no rental, no meaningful return, continuing the same approach stops looking like innovation and starts looking like refusal to adapt. That's where the audience steps in. Because real business operates on the principle that results matter. You can stage a home beautifully, you can decorate it with luxury finishes, and you can film it for television. But if the numbers don't move, the business isn't moving. Viewers don't need an MBA to see that. They just need memory.
This is where the editing becomes its own character in the story. When things aren't going well, reality TV has two choices: show it or hide it. Showing it would provide accountability, relatability, and honesty. Hiding it protects the storyline, preserves image, and maintains the illusion of success. And in this case, the choice was protection. Critical questions disappeared. Serious concerns were replaced with upbeat music, confidence-filled commentary, and those smooth, optimistic talking points that make everything sound like it's going according to plan. But controlled optimism only works when the audience doesn't have access to information outside the show. That era is over. Social media has made it impossible to control the narrative once the cameras stop rolling. Clips get replayed, timelines get compared, viewers connect dots. Once editing becomes selective, trust becomes fragile. Then comes the contrast. While all of this was unfolding on-screen, something else was happening off-screen, something that made the storyline look even more manufactured by comparison. Melody hosted a sold-out event. No storyline, no manufactured drama, no editing, no producers deciding which moments were allowed to exist, just real people showing up in real time without the medium of television validating it. And that matters for one reason. Success doesn't need permission. It doesn't need to be edited, curated, or repackaged to look believable. It simply exists. And that event sent a quiet but loud message. Influence can grow without reality TV. Revenue can happen without controlled narratives. Audience support doesn't need filters. That's when viewers started asking a new question. If she can produce real results without TV, is TV helping other people look successful without the results? Then Carlos King entered the conversation with commentary about accountability, and that layered in a whole new dynamic. His point was clear. If you sign up for reality television, you sign up for accountability. You don't get to quit when the questions get uncomfortable. You don't get to disappear when criticism lands. And while his take was aimed at cast members who avoid accountability, it invited a much bigger question that production rarely wants to address. Does accountability apply to editing choices too? If cast members are expected to stand on their actions, should production be expected to stand on the fullest version of the truth? Because you can't preach accountability while actively removing the scenes that create it. That contradiction isn't lost on viewers. In fact, it's fueling the backlash. Reality TV used to thrive on the assumption that viewers would watch, react emotionally, and then move on. Not anymore. The audience today analyzes, they compare, they pause, they revisit, they fact-check, they cross-reference interviews, social media posts, and old clips. And once they spot a pattern, they don't unsee it. That's what has changed the power dynamic. Viewers don't rely on the show for the full story anymore. They treat the show as one version of the story and then go find the missing chapters elsewhere. That's what production underestimated, because once the audience starts doing their own investigative work, selective editing does the opposite of what it's designed to do. It doesn't control the narrative, it confirms that the narrative needs controlling. However, before we get to the fireworks, let's rewind to where the first eyebrow visibly twitched, the real estate storyline that was supposed to scream prestige, wealth, and generational success, but instead started sounding more like a cautionary tale disguised as a glossy confession. It begins with the homes, the high-end investment builds that are frequently announced with fanfare, marketed with bravado, and positioned as proof of entrepreneurial genius. On paper, it all sounds impressive. $1 million properties, upscale furnishings, and luxury finishes that could rival any designer catalog. But the reality, once you look closer, has a few dents. Because what the audience was originally sold was a triumphant narrative about real estate wins, contracts secured, timelines progressing, and communities being elevated. But behind that TV-friendly optimism was a quieter, less glamorous truth. Those high-end homes weren't selling, they weren't renting, and in business, when inventory freezes, so does profit. And this brings us to the scene that never saw the light of day. According to extended footage chatter, fan forums, and leaked discussion, someone finally asked the obvious: why does this home still have no buyer or tenant? And why is someone suddenly moving into it? What should have been a straightforward business update turned into a moment of visible discomfort. Because when real-world economics enter the frame, supply, demand, market value, reality TV doesn't get to just chop those facts out of the storyline. That information matters. It changes perception, it reframes ambition, and more importantly, it demands accountability for decisions that didn't pan out. Instead, that whole exchange evaporated from the broadcast. Poof. Gone. Not trimmed for time, but surgically removed like it never existed. And that's the exact moment fans stopped sipping their tea and started slamming it down, demanding explanations. Because reality TV is messy by nature. That's part of the entertainment. But when mess is allowed selectively, when certain narratives are sharpened and others softened, viewers don't just watch, they investigate.
What insiders described was not a strategic pivot for the home, but a reluctant admission that after months of no interest from buyers and no traction on the rental market, someone living in the home became the last resort option. And that distinction matters because strategy implies foresight, planning, and market savvy. Last resort implies surrender, a business move made only after the intended plan collapsed. The difference between the two is huge. One is competence, the other is improvisation. And improvisation in business is not automatically a scandal. Plenty of entrepreneurs pivot under pressure. But the scandal arrives when the pivot is disguised, repackaged, and then sanitized for television. Viewers are not wrong for raising eyebrows, because from a financial perspective, repeating the same business formula, luxury builds in a moderate demand market, and expecting applause is not just optimistic, it's delusional. The Huntsville real estate market is not Los Angeles, not Miami, not Atlanta. There are not endless buyers ready to drop 7 figures on a new build just because a reality star is attached to the property. That's not how economics works, and audiences know it, especially audiences that work in real estate, finance, or construction. And yes, they watch reality TV too. The internet is not just memes and stan accounts. It is CPAs, realtors, developers, and project managers who recognize when the math stops mathing. And that is precisely why the deleted footage matters, not because it would have destroyed anyone's reputation, but because it would have revealed a pattern instead of an isolated hiccup. Patterns are powerful in storytelling, and they are even more powerful in business. If you sell one home successfully and the next one flops, that's a bump. If you fail to move multiple homes across multiple timelines, that's a blueprint, just not the kind that inspires investor confidence. And yet, the show opted to slice out the uncomfortable piece, leaving viewers with optimism but no accountability. This is where production enters the conversation, and it gets messy fast. Television runs on narratives, and narratives run on character construction. Heroes, villains, underdogs, visionaries, everyone must fit a lane for the storyline to track. And if a cast member's curated TV persona revolves around business success, entrepreneurial hustle, and top-tier ambition, then scenes that threaten that image become inconvenient. Editing is not random. Editing is intention. It is the art of deciding what audiences should feel and believe about the cast. And when certain cast members have their stumbles edited out, while others have their failures broadcast at full volume with Dolby stereo and slow-motion framing, that is not just storytelling, that is manipulation. Viewers noticed, and when viewers notice, they talk. When they talk, they compare notes. When they compare notes, trends emerge. One trend being whispered across social platforms is that production is disproportionately invested in image protection for certain names. Meanwhile, others are mined for conflict, humiliation, or dysfunction because it makes better TV. That kind of selective exposure does not just influence perception, it alters reputation, and reputation in reality TV is currency. But the television narrative is only half the story, because outside the carefully curated episodes, social media has become the great equalizer. Twitter threads, TikTok breakdowns, forum sleuthing, fan commentary, and receipts. Endless, relentless receipts. The audience no longer waits for the reunion special to get clarity. They crowdsource it in real time. They archive clips, compare seasons, scrutinize inconsistencies, and drag networks when they feel gaslit. The days of the passive viewer are over. Reality TV forgot that the internet has a memory and no loyalty to production agendas. And while all this was simmering, another plot twist arrived from a completely different angle: Melody's sold-out event. And it wasn't just sold out, it was successful in the one way reality TV hates the most: independently. No producers, no storyline, no confessional cutaways explaining the context, no cast drama anchoring the turnout, just audience, engagement, and proof of relevance. And that created a fascinating contrast, because suddenly the conversation shifted from who has the best storyline to who actually has impact outside of the show. Reality TV loves to manufacture importance. The audience loves to verify it, and Melody offered verification without asking for permission or airtime. The message was clear: television can amplify, but it is not required for legitimacy, and that alone was enough to make certain people uncomfortable, because if one cast member proves they can thrive without the show's platform, it forces uncomfortable implications about who needs the show for survival and who is simply using it as one of many lanes. Networks love dependency. Independence throws a wrench in that system. Then, like a cherry on a chaotic Sunday, Carlos King entered the chat, and Carlos has never been shy about commentary. His recent remarks about reality stars who quit, avoid conflict, or opt out of uncomfortable narratives reopened the conversation about the cost of authenticity on camera. According to his framing, if you sign up for reality TV, you sign up for the mess, including accountability, confrontation, and fallout. But his critique also exposes the imbalance. If some cast members are shielded while others are sacrificed for ratings, the playing field is not equal. And when it's not equal, accountability starts looking like targeted punishment dressed up as entertainment.
This convergence, Martell's questionable business decisions, selective editing from production, Melody's independent success, and Carlos's commentary forms a narrative bigger than just one cast or one network. It's about the evolving ecosystem of reality television itself. The audience is demanding transparency. The networks are still obsessed with control. The cast is caught in the middle, trying to maintain relevance without being devoured, and the internet is sitting on the side with popcorn and spreadsheets. And here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Trust has become the currency of reality TV. Not fame, not controversy, not even ratings. Trust. Once the audience believes they are being managed instead of informed, the cracks appear, and those cracks don't go away. They spread season to season, episode to episode, storyline to storyline, until everything feels suspect. Viewers start questioning wins, questioning apologies, questioning achievements, questioning losses, and questioning everything in between. Because the reality in reality TV has always been negotiable, but we are entering an era where that negotiation is no longer happening behind the scenes. It's happening publicly, with audiences demanding receipts. And receipts don't lie. People do, networks do, producers do, cast members do, editing does. But receipts? Receipts have no loyalty to narratives. Eventually, the storyline moved past real estate and past footage. The real issue became trust. Audiences don't mind watching people make mistakes. They don't mind failure, conflict, difficult moments, or messy realities. In fact, those things make people more relatable. What audiences do not tolerate is being misled. When a storyline keeps resetting without resolution, when wins are exaggerated, when losses are renamed as strategy, and when business issues get turned into aesthetic montages with background music, credibility erodes. And when credibility erodes, every future storyline becomes suspect. Even genuine success gets side-eyed. Even sincere efforts get questioned. That's the cost of replacing transparency with perception management. Once perception replaces truth for too long, truth eventually forces its way back into the conversation, usually louder. Now the situation sits at a crossroads. The cast, production, and audience are all staring at the same set of questions. Will there be reflection or repetition? Will transparency increase, or will footage keep disappearing? Will accountability apply to everyone or only selectively? Will the storyline continue to protect image or finally confront results? Because here's the reality. Viewers are not asking for perfection, they're asking for honesty. They're asking for accountability. They're asking for reality in reality television. And once the audience wakes up to controlled narratives, they do not go back to sleep. They compare, they remember, they connect dots. Not because they hate the cast, but because they hate feeling manipulated. And that might be the most important message in this entire situation. When people stop trusting the storyteller, they stop trusting the story. So now the question remains, were these high-end builds bold vision or stubborn ego? Was deleting that footage about protecting feelings or about controlling narrative? And does Melody's success prove that television is optional, or does it simply show what authentic connection looks like outside of edits and storylines? Let me know in the comments how you see it, because at this point, the audience isn't reacting to drama, they're reacting to the feeling that something is being withheld. And once viewers feel withheld from, accountability doesn't just become important, it becomes inevitable. Like, subscribe, and we'll break down the next layer in the next video because trust me, this story isn't finished yet.